Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and I have the great honor of speaking with an economist, former editor and columnist of the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and other national publications. He's a co-founder of Reaganomics and is, in my opinion, a true patriot of this country. Please make welcome Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Roberts.
Hey, Roy, I'm pleased to be with you.
Well, I certainly appreciate you taking a few minutes of your time out, and I know you're trying to get moved and you got a lot going on, so I'd greatly appreciate it. And let's just jump right in. And with the COMEX being nothing more than a rigged paper casino, and if you look at it from that perspective, and with the Shanghai Gold Exchange, the Dubai commodities market, and the new Russian gold market, all of these are physical markets. You acquire the metal, you pay it up, and move on. Now and India, with their relentless importation of gold, black market or above board, will a combination or just one of these markets, in your opinion, take over the pricing mechanism for gold and silver? And how do you see the pricing mechanism for gold and silver being handled in the future? Will it be in the East? Well, we know it's going to be in the East, but will it be similar to what we have going on now, or do you think it's going to be something completely different?
Well, Roy, to be truthful, I don't know.
Okay.
As I understand it, the way it's set up, the price of gold is determined in the paper future markets. And this is very convenient for speculators, and it's very convenient for central banks, such as the Federal Reserve, because they can always force down the gold price by printing enormous amounts of futures contracts and dumping them into the futures market during periods of practically no trading. And as Dave Cranston and I have shown on several occasions with the graphs, enormous amounts of gold represented by these paper contracts are dumped at the most inopportune times. And the only reason for doing that would be to drive down the price. Nobody in a gold position would want to get out of it at the highest cost. But that's what's been happening now since late 2011. We've had endless examples of massive amounts, 40 tons of paper contracts or paper contracts representing 40 tons of gold dumped at 3 o'clock in the morning, U.S. East Coast time, when there's no trading. And the whole only purpose of that is to drive down the price. And this has been done, as we have said so many times, in order to save the dollar from quantitative easing. When the Federal Reserve is creating trillions of new dollars, as it's done since 2009, its balance sheet has gone up from about 900 billion to 4.5 trillion. So this enormous creation of dollars will put pressure on the dollar's exchange value. And if the dollar were to collapse and cease to be the reserve currency, the United States could no longer pay its bills by issuing debt. And the power of the United States would collapse with the dollar. And so we have seen that as the pressure on the dollar from quantitative easing showed itself in a rising gold price, that the reaction of authorities, primarily the Federal Reserve, Dave and I think, operating through the bullion banks, have printed enormous amounts of paper futures contracts and sold them in order to suppress the price of gold. Now, as long as the price of gold can be determined in these futures markets, as long as the world accepts this precedent, this tradition, the result for Asia is that they're able to buy gold at heavily subsidized prices, far below the market price. Any economist knows that when the demand for gold is rising and there are constraints on the supply, it's not possible for the price to be falling unless it's rigged. And the only reason it can be rigged is that it's set in a paper gold market in which almost all of the transactions, all of the futures contracts are settled in cash, not in gold. So these are uncovered contracts, or what are known as naked shorts, that are sold in order to drive down the price. And so as long as that can continue, they can continue to suppress the gold price and simultaneously subsidize the Asian purchase of gold far below the market price. I would imagine that the Chinese are very happy with this arrangement.
I would think.
And anyone else buying gold. And the question that you ask is, how long can this go on? I would think that the limit would be when the Western the Western banks can no longer make deliveries on the gold that the Asians want to buy. And we are starting to see, I think, strains on this because according to reports that I read within the last week or two, the Federal Reserve had to suspend sales of silver eagles.
Yes.
Because it could not get the silver to produce enough eagles to keep up with the demand. And the Canadian central bank had to ration the supply of silver maple leaves because it couldn't get the silver to keep up with the demand. Now, when you have demand that outstrips supply and the price is falling, you know the price is rigged. There's no other way. There's no other explanation. And you would think this would be a scandal. And there would be investigations by Congress in the United States, by the Parliament, and or whatever it is in Canada, that people want to know how come it is that supply is rationed and price is falling.
How can it be?
How can it be? What's going on? So the rigging is obvious and it's accepted because it's a way of protecting the wealth of the 1%. Okay. Because all of the liquidity that the Federal Reserve has been supplying since the downturn in 2008 has gone into financial paper asset prices, such as stocks and bonds. So the wealthy are getting richer and richer, and this is what the income distribution statistics show. The United States now has one of the worst income and wealth distributions on the face of the earth. It's worse than some of the third world gangster states.
That's a crime in itself.
It's extraordinary. They completely have destroyed the United States as an opportunity society. There's no opportunity for anybody who's not in the stock market riding this money creation that drives up asset prices. Now, Roy, we see the same thing, I think, in Switzerland. If you look at this referendum that they were able to get on the vote later this month in a few days, when the Swiss vote whether or not the Swiss central bank should keep 20% of its reserves in gold. And what the polls show is that all the poor people favor this, and all the rich people oppose it.
Right.
Now, why is this? And the reason is, the view in Switzerland is that if this passes, it means a strong franc, and therefore it means the cost of living for the poor falls. The imports of food, the prices of rent, so that a strong franc helps the poor people because it reduces their cost of living. But what does it do to the rich people? It reduces liquidity that drives up share prices. It means a strong franc reduces exports, and therefore corporate profits and share prices go down, and the wealth of the wealthy go down. So this is clearly a class-based decision.
It's class warfare.
It's a class-based decision. Who is going to benefit? Are the wealthy going to get even more wealthy at the expense of the poor? Or are the poor able to put some check on this and get some relief from this measure? Well, of course, the Swiss establishment is totally against it, as is Washington. So I doubt there'll be an honest election.
Yes. It doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts the votes.
When has the establishment ever allowed an honest election? Never. Ever.
It kind of leads into my next question, and I don't know if you saw this article on King World News where Peter Boehringer, who was one of the primary architects of the German gold repatriation movement, he came out on November the 20th and flat out said there is no gold in the Federal Reserve, and that the Germans' resolve is stronger than ever. We're not giving up. Apparently there was an article in what he said, how he described it was a large online news organization, and he said that this online news organization was saying that the Germans were done. They were just throwing the hat in the ring, throwing their hat in. It's over. We're giving up. And he came on King World News to specifically say, we're not done. Our resolve is stronger than ever. There is no gold in the Federal Reserve. And what I'm getting at is that, and today, on November the 21st, we find out that the Netherlands receives 122 tons of gold from the Federal Reserve. But it arrived to them by ship. And Dave Cransworth believes that gold, and he gives a very good argument for it, that it came from the GLD fund. And it was that 120 tons came from the GLD, and then the remainder came from the gold that was stolen from Ukraine, that was airlifted out of Ukraine earlier this year. And he connects the dots, and he does a very good job of doing that. But now the Germans only want 300 tons. The Swiss are going to need somewhere around 1,500 tons. And the question that I have is that if the Germans don't think that there's any gold in the Federal Reserve vaults, why would anybody else believe there's gold in their vaults?
Well, you see, there may well not be, because it's sort of been a view in the gold community, as I understand it. You know, I'm not a member of that. I'm not a gold trader. I don't sell or deal in gold. But the view, as I understand it, has been for years that initially the way the Federal Reserve suppressed the gold price was to lease its gold to bullion dealers who sold it in order to suppress the rise. In other words, if you're always dumping supply of metal on the market, you can keep the demand from pushing the price up.
Right.
And so the view that, as I understand it, that for many years, the Federal Reserve leased out its gold to bullion dealers in order to have it sold to suppress the rising price, and that there's no more gold there. And this may be true. On the other hand, there's another reason for the Fed, or the Federal Reserve of the United States in Washington, not to give the gold back to Germany. And that is that there is a movement within Germany to leave the EU, to leave NATO, to develop their relations with Russia, which is far more natural for them. They've got the technology, the industrial discipline, the manufacturing know-how. Russia has all the resources. Right. And this is an alliance made in heaven. There's no better alliance anywhere on the face of the earth. Oh. And if the Germans had gold with which to back the mark, return to the mark, it would be the end of American hegemony over Europe. It would break up NATO, it would break up the EU, and therefore it could well be there's plenty of gold in Fort Knox, but they're not going to let the Germans have theirs back because it could be used for a strong mark, which would then go hand in hand with a strong ruble. You know, the Russians have been buying gold, and there's a limit on how much the American authorities and the financial banks and the hedge funds can drive down the ruble, and they're sitting on tons and tons and tons of gold. So that's an alternative view. I don't know which is correct. I'm just pointing out that there are more than one reason that Washington wouldn't give gold back to Germany, even though it's on trust here. The Germans put, I think the total amount is 1,500 tons, and yet we can't deliver 300 tons.
Yeah, and I think they asked for like 600 or between 600 and 700 tons of it back.
Well, I think they asked for it all, and I think what we told them was we would give them 300 tons over 7 years.
Yes,
but it's already broken down. We haven't been able to. We've stopped the agreement that we made. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of this, but I do know that if you have the United States, which inherited the role of reserve currency after World War II, because the British were essentially wiped out, and you're used to this role, which lets you simply run up any debt you want because the rest of the world has to purchase it. You're financed. You have the ability to finance your payments by printing money. And this tend to get carried away with this power. So it can well be a situation where the United States authorities have realized that they have so inundated the world with dollars that the value of it is tenuous in people's eyes, and therefore they must protect it by preventing a rise in the gold price. Because if the dollar is deteriorating in terms of gold, it must also be deteriorating in terms of other currencies that are inflating at the same rate as the dollar. Now, what we see happening is Washington is trying to get other currencies to inflate at the same rate or at a higher rate, like Japan.
Right.
They now have the Japanese central bank inflating the yen at massive rates.
Massive.
And I saw today, I haven't had a chance to study it, but I saw today that the head of the European Central Bank says that whatever it takes to support the recovery in Europe, they're going to do it. Jeez. So this means this is an excuse of an American vassal to support the dollar by printing euros and pretending that he's doing it to support the European economy. You see, this is how, and of course, we don't have a financial media. They're blind, or they're propagandists.
Yes.
They read the press releases that are handed to them by the government. So you have people living in something like the Matrix. I don't know if you saw that film, The Matrix.
Yes, sir.
How long can this continue? It's continued longer than I thought. The whole thing is a house of cards. And it all rests on the dollar. And therefore, that means gold is a threat to the dollar. And so they're going to suppress gold as long as they possibly can.
Well, I hope that their time is running short. Well, I say that, but it kind of scares me what's on the other side of that. Because I don't know what that's going to look like.
Well, whatever it looks like, it does reduce American power and therefore reduces the likelihood of nuclear war.
Well, that would be good.
And so even if we have all kinds of dislocations financially, it kind of ends this view, this hubris that the United States is the indispensable, exceptional country ordained to exercise hegemony over the world. Yes. And any countries that get in the way, such as Russia and China, have to be dealt with in severe ways. Well, of course, Russia and China are not going to tolerate being dealt with in severe ways.
They don't have to.
They don't have to. And so the whole thing pushes toward nuclear confrontation. And the neoconservatives in the United States are driving that.
Do you think that they're going to? Do you think they're going to succeed?
Putin keeps turning the other cheek, and the Chinese keep ignoring it. But when you have Hillary Clinton, and the view is that she could be the next president, she is in bed with a military security complex, and she has said that Putin, the Russian president, is the new Hitler.
Oh, my goodness.
So that's very hard to back away from, that
Yes.
kind of statement. And once you make that statement, the logical development is that you come to confrontations. Well, so I think on the whole that, in my opinion, the rest of the world has been extremely foolish to accept the dollar as the reserve currency and to participate in the American payment system, because it gives the United States control over their countries. No country that participates in the dollar payment system is independent. No country that participates in the dollar payment system has sovereignty. They're vassal states. They're subject to Washington's orders. And if they disobey, they either get overthrown or they get sanctions.
Or they get bombed.
So, the reason for using the dollar payment system is simply laziness on the part of other governments. They can't be bothered to do something different. It's too much trouble. So we'll be American vassals. And so essentially the entire world is an American vassal. And the ones that aren't, like Iran and Russia, have sanctions. And China, they're scared to sanction China because it's our greatest creditor.
Yes, and our manufacturing
And they don't know what the result might be. I mean, what would be the result, Rory, if China announced one morning they were selling their entire holding of dollar assets?
It would get ugly quick.
It would do us in quicker than an all-out nuclear attack. So I don't really know what's going to happen other than we have a house of cards. The Western financial system is a house of cards. It's based in corruption and on the dollar. And they have to keep the dollar from collapsing. Because if there's a run on the dollar, the house of cards collapses. And everything goes down. So they'll do whatever they can possibly do, which means rigging the gold price, rigging the silver price, putting out all kinds of false economic information,
Yes,
convincing people we have a recovery, that the dollar is a safe haven. How is the dollar a safe haven when the United States is probably the most indebted country of all?
in the history of the world.
Yeah. But all of this propaganda gets repeated endlessly. And the vassal states, Great Britain, France, Germany, if they know any different, they don't say it. Japan.
Japan's been a puppet for a long time, I believe.
That's right. I mean, they're still occupied.
Still occupied, thank you.
So that's my view of it, Rory. I haven't anything else to say about that.
Well, all right. Just one short question, and like I said, it's from Dave. With your long storied career, Dr. Roberts, why do you continue to fight the good fight and to continue to try to give it to them in real terms? I mean, you meet them right where they stand and say, that's not right. This is you're not being true. Why don't you be true? Why do you continue to fight?
Well, I think because I respect truth and I believe in justice. And I think these values raise us up. It's the reason if you don't defend truth and justice, you're a criminal. You can't look yourself in the mirror. You might get rich, and you may have yachts and Playboy bunnies running around your home, and jet planes, and endless wealth. If you were raised the way I was, you couldn't look yourself in the mirror. So wealth and money and women and yachts are not a substitute for truth and integrity. They're more valuable.
Much more.
And whether this is due to my upbringing or it's something in genes, I have no idea. That type of thing is something I've never studied. But I just don't like people who don't do the right thing. I don't approve of them. I don't like them. And I don't want to be one of them. A few years ago, I've told the story before, but it answers your question. A few years ago, I received a call from a friend I hadn't heard from in some years. He was a professor in a prominent university in the Northeast. And he said, I had lunch last week with your former colleagues in Washington. And I asked about you. And they said, oh, poor Craig. If he hadn't turned critic, he'd be worth hundreds of millions of dollars like us.
Oh,
and my friend said, he stood up and said, I didn't know I was having lunch with a bunch of whores, and left.
oh, that's awesome.
So I think that's it. The system today is so corrupt that truth is an enemy of wealth and power because they're based in lies and mendacity. And I just wasn't prepared to lie in order to be part of Washington. And I don't think that Washington will survive. It's just too corrupt.
Yes.
And when you get that corrupt, you can't understand what the situation is. You're full of hubris and arrogance, and people who are full of hubris and arrogance are ready for the fall. And I don't think Washington has the power to prevail over Russia and China.
I don't either.
And they may not have the power to prevail over the American people. If we get into a serious recession, which I suspect is going to happen,
I would too.
and people are hungry, and they've got no work and no income, and the dollar's collapsing and prices are rising,
Yep.
and they can't make ends meet. So I think what has happened is we have had a failure of leadership in the United States. It's a gigantic failure, a massive failure, larger than the failure of leadership in the Roman Empire that brought that empire down. So that's my view. I think that the leaders have failed us, and that the failure is massive, and that what's keeping the thing going is just tradition. The dominance of the United States since World War II, and it has no real strength. It's just tradition. People think that way. But so many things, there's so many cracks and rotted joints that their ability to keep this fake image alive, I think, is limited. And it's astounding to me that Washington, which is, in my view, in a weak position, runs Russia with sanctions, because the sanctions then encourage Russia to leave the dollar payment system, to arrange a different payment system, which is what they're doing.
Yes.
And so that in itself takes away demand for dollars, weakens the dollar and currency markets. So in a way, the arrogance of Washington is bringing about its own demise. You know, the Russians are creating their own clearing system, a substitute for the SWIFT system.
Yes.
So they can't be sanctioned. They're abandoning the dollar as the means of payment for their energy sales.
Yep.
They're going to be paid in Chinese currency or rubles. Well, and we see other countries joining them, Brazil, India. I mean, these are massive countries.
Massive.
BRICS now account for, 40-50% of the world population.
Now, the BRICS nations as a whole are 45% of
45%.
the world's manufacturing.
So what it tells me that the hubris that took over Washington after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which made them think that there's nobody but us.
Right.
And history has chose us to rule the world. And people who don't do what we want get invaded or sanctioned or whatever. It's not working. You know, when a superpower after 13 years can't defeat a few thousand lightly armed Taliban, and look at the mess in Iraq.
Yes.
The consequence now is some kind of new Islamic state carved out of parts of Syria, part of Iraq. We don't know what to do about it. All of our efforts to bomb them, it doesn't have any effect. If we send in an army, they'll probably defeat it. We'll probably be defeated.
That's a sad statement.
It'll be a huge blow to prestige. The dollar would collapse. They're fools. They're fools. We're governed by fools. The mistakes that fools make are deadly. And so we're all subject. And we can't change the leadership because the powerful interest groups will not permit somebody who actually represents the people. They will only permit people who represent their interests. So you got Wall Street, you got the military security complex, you've got the Israel lobby, you've got the extractive industries, mining, timber, energy, you've got agribusiness. They rule. They write the laws.
Yes.
They control the campaign donations. Whoever gets in is indebted to them, not to the people. And they're pursuing their own interests. And these interests are not consistent with a successful country. So that's my view of it, Roy. I think we've pretty much covered the waterfront now.
Well, and I certainly appreciate it, and I'm not going to take up another minute of your time, and you've been very, very generous, and I greatly appreciate it. And we've been speaking with Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. And Dr. Roberts, I hope that I have the opportunity to speak with you again in the future. I won't impose any more on your time than I have this evening.
Okay, Roy, we'll do it again.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
You too. Good night.